Hey folks, today we're talking about kink, all things kink. Kink is often framed of 50 Shades of Grey. There's actually a really great TikTok reaction video that essentially describes how I feel about this. So you can see, I find 50 Shades of Grey to be limited as far as a view of kink, BDSM, and a lot of varieties and how many shades of the different parts of kink that people are excited by, that people engage in, and we need to deconstruct this cultural context. So now that we have more context, kind of like the pleasure principle, I brought Dr. Stefani Goerlich, certified sex therapist, author, to give us some more nerdy nuances about kink and with the help of side-eye curiosity and a little disdain that we're gonna check on your face. Join us, stick around to the end. This is a great interview. Enjoy. Sex Talk with Erica Miley. Hey folks, welcome to Sex Talk with Erica Miley. Erica Miley here. This show and all of the audience is pretty familiar with me bringing fellow nerds. And I brought you yet another lovely human being. Let's welcome Dr. Stefani Goerlich, certified sex therapist and author, board certified diplomate of sexology. If I could words today. Stephanie, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
We're talking about kink. Oh, yay! So I really want to hear how you took your journey from young one through school to sex therapist, and specifically how you ended up in kink affirming care.
Okay. So if you ask my mother, she will tell you that I, since childhood, have not been happy unless I've had a cause. I wrote angry letters to the public library in elementary school because they wouldn't let kids on the elevator, and I found that appalling.
I am so proud of little you.
Injustice. I have always been I hate to say a fighter for the underdog because that sounds so like condescending to the people that need support. But I mean, that's what my mother would say. So that's just kind of always been my personality. I never considered anything other than social service work. My first major was art therapy. I always done this. And when I was actually, before I even had my bachelor's, I was volunteering as a sexual assault first response advocate. So I was meeting survivors in, at that time, the first 48 hours after their assault, doing crisis intervention. I was sitting with them through the police interviews. I was not typically going into the forensic exams with them, but preparing them for the forensic exams, all that good stuff. And I was shocked at how police treated my survivors. One of the best parts of that job was being able to, as like a 23-year-old girl, be like, you can leave now.
Yes. Yes.
And the idea of sexual shame and sexual stigma and people who deserve to have their experiences matter and who don't really was highlighted through that work.
Yes.
So that was most of my career. I spent most of my 20s and 30s working with sexual assault survivors, with human trafficking survivors, pediatric sexual assault survivors. And when I met my now partner, I was working the domestic violence agency. And one day I told him this hilarious story. It's still one of the funniest things as a social worker that's ever happened to me. And he looked at me and he goes, wait, your office has a panic button? And I'm like, baby, every room has a panic button. I don't even.
When you're in social work, absolutely.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
He's like, you go into lockdown? I'm like, that was Tuesday. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I didn't tell you. And so what was just like kind of the water that I swam in professionally became an area of concern for him. And I agreed that maybe I could consider the idea of moving into a private practice space where I didn't have a panic button. But I had been working in the really ugly side of sexual health and people's bodies being weaponized against them, people's
Yeah.
love being weaponized against them. And I wanted to stay in that world, but I decided I kind of wanted to like flip the coin. So I did my sex therapy training at the University of Michigan. And for anybody that does sex therapy training anywhere, one part of that process is called a SAR, right? You go through the sexual attitudes reassessment experience. And as a part of my SAR process, you know, you're supposed to be exposed to as many aspects and variations of human sexuality as you can. And, you know, we saw very senior couples holding each other and stroking each other and being intimate even when penetration was no longer possible. And people in my STAR group were like, oh, that's so beautiful. I hope my partner and I are like that when we're old. And we saw people with disabilities who were working with sex workers to claim like their body and their agency and their sexuality, even within what we would consider maybe limitations. And my cohort was like, oh, they're so brave. That's so inspiring. And then we got our 90 minutes on BDSM and kink. And the whole energy in the room changed. And it got very whispery and very giggly and very tittery. And at one point, somebody made a joke, like out loud to the entire group and went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I couldn't help myself. I couldn't help myself. And I looked at her and I'm like, you absolutely could because you knew enough to apologize.
Right?
And that really, really bothered me because you know, we're there, obviously, to consider our biases. But in a group of mental health professionals who self-selected into working with sexual health,
absolutely
prepared for the level of bias that I saw.
Doug Brown Harvey, my favorite thing that he has ever said is that the most uncomfortable person in the room has all of the attention. And that's what they did. That example right there, they were the most uncomfortable person in the room.
Yeah, and so that actually was kind of like the origin story for my first book. And I wrote The Leather Couch because people needed to understand how not to hurt their clients.
Yes.
I wasn't asking for affirmation. I wasn't asking for enthusiasm. I just wanted you to know enough to not titter and giggle and side-eye the way I saw amongst my peers. And from there, that really became the focus of my private practice, right? Like I had always worked in sexual health and in the world of consent violations and bodily violations. And so moving into the realm of erotic minorities and negotiating consent and creative expression of control and power and all of that became a really core element of my work. And now my entire practice is centered around working with erotic minorities, almost exclusively power exchange dynamics, but not entirely. And it's where I put my time and my energy. It is my elevator letter to the library as a 40-something.
I hope that librarian loved your little kid. Like that just makes me entirely tickled that was your origin story. And to be completely honest, you and I share the kind of early parts of our career. I started in helping and doing housing for folks who'd experienced sexual assault, but then I later did treatment with those who'd committed sexual offenses. So we share this early experience with the extreme, right? And usually harm, consent violations. And often in those settings, at least I'll speak to in the sex offender world, like the research world, kink in particular is seen as a negative. It's seen as something that's pathologized. And I remember at the time reading all of the research that essentially never supported that, that kink equals that you are going to commit a sex crime. It just doesn't add up. But these myths absolutely are pervasive throughout culture, through research, all over the place. So I'm just so glad to hear that how your trajectory changed, and we get the benefits of the book and now podcast. We're gonna talk about that here in a second, but I am curious, like with the myths and the biases in the media and research, what do you wish more people knew?
Um, you spoke to part of it, right? The idea that kink itself is not a gateway drug into something else.
Ugh, yeah.
And that alone is huge within the world of criminal justice. Kinky
Mm-hmm.
survivors, people who had violating experiences in kink spaces or within kink relationships,
Mm-hmm.
are dismissed out of hand
Mm-hmm.
because they obviously either asked for it or consented to it, or if they didn't consent to it, their signals were mixed because they consented to other things.
It's the same bias, just with a
Yeah.
different hat on.
I have a talk I do for the kink community about domestic violence, sexual assault in kink. And one of the things I show them that most people outside of sort of your work and my work don't necessarily get to see is a forensic body map, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
the outline of the body that a forensic nurse or a doctor goes through
Mm-hmm.
and marks the various injuries when somebody has been assaulted. And
Mm-hmm.
we have a conversation about how difficult it is for a police officer to understand, much less try to communicate to a prosecutor, that
Yes.
these bruises up here were from a different encounter with somebody else. And these
Mm-hmm.
scratches over here, those they consented to because scratching was on the table. But
Mm-hmm.
this cut here, that was non-consensual because that was
Mm-hmm.
outside of what they negotiated. And the complicated nature of kink assaults or assaults that occur in kink spaces
Mm-hmm.
make it next to impossible for survivors to be taken seriously. And
Yeah.
so just recognizing the confusion that negotiated consent can cause, and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that kink itself is not a risk factor, or is it an excuse for problematic behavior, is really, really crucial. And those are two sides of the same coin that often get pulled apart and separated into two separate issues. But we can't say that kink is not a risk factor for offending, kink is
Mm-hmm.
not a risk factor for violations, and also at the same time try to say that kink space is totally fine and wonderful and everybody should do everything great. And if they've consented once, they've consented always. So it's such a complicated space. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm overcomplicating it even just now in talking. That would be what I would want people to understand, is that kink itself is not a risk factor and it's not an excuse.
You mean that human behavior, human sexuality, and the things that we do are more complex than what we would rather them be? I
Yeah, it's
just
shocking. I know this is a novel concept, this idea of gray space. The binary is bad.
I was actually last night watching catching up on John Oliver, and he was talking about how in sexual assault training, many officers do not have more training than what they've seen on SVU, and that they are informed by SVU. And having worked in the prison setting, you having worked with those who've been victimized by sexual assault, like I can confirm that. I can confirm some of the files that I've read, and you've already described some of the things you've seen. There's more nuance, and we need more information,
Yes.
more complexity, more gray. So I do want to talk about your podcast, because what you are doing in your podcast, I think, is going to be really, really wonderful, fascinating, and this nerd will gobble it all up. The show's called Securing Sexuality, and it's all about how power dynamics look different, or potentially the same, in an online space. And not only just that, but kink generally. I really want to hear from you about, like, dating today. We were talking about, before we started recording, the polycules that we work with and how they have partners kind of all over. I just want to hear your reflections about it, and maybe how you decided to start a show.
So I'm going to start with that last part because the last part kind of lays the foundation for the first part. My partner works in cybersecurity and information security.
Mhm.
Actually, when he and I first met, part of how we dated and like flirted was we built a conference talk together. I was doing a lot of healthcare consulting at the time, working with doctors about
Mhm.
engagement practices, how to be
Mm.
kinder, less traumatizing in their work and their interactions with patients.
Mhm.
And my then boyfriend is like, well, what you do and what I do is totally the same thing. And I'm like, no, no, it's not. That talks to doctors, you're like fancy hacker bro, not the same. He goes, "No, think about it." He goes, "You can be working with the most brilliant cardiologist on the planet,
Mhm.
and he can have cutting edge research, best treatment plan, latest
Yep.
interventions. But he has to be able to explain that to the patient in a way they understand,
Yep.
has to get them to buy into his treatment plan, and has to get them to follow through when they leave."
Absolutely.
He goes, "I can have the best system ever to secure a company,
Mhm.
but I have to be able to explain it to my client in a way that they understand, get
Mhm.
them to buy in, and get them to keep doing it when I leave." And I'm like, "You're right. We do the same thing." So literally when we were dating, we did this joint talk called Playing Doctor.
I love it.
And I told patient engagement stories and he drew security lessons out of that.
Mm.
So fast forward to now, COVID happens. Everybody is moving even more online than they ever have been.
Yes.
And I mean, dating and romance and sexuality and sexual expression have been online since the 90s, but now
Mhm.
it's become really like the default, right?
Yes.
I told you before we started, nobody dates acoustic style anymore. Like there's no like going to a club and meeting somebody. It's dating websites, it's apps,
Yes.
it's all sorts of things. People are polycules, they're using messenger
Mhm.
apps to have their group threads. People are sharing pictures. People are using social media sites like FetLife and Color Space and all sorts of things.
Mhm.
It's become the water that we swim in to live our relationships and express our sexuality in online and digital spaces.
Yes.
But most of us don't necessarily have the understanding we need in order to do that really, truly safely.
Mhm.
So we had talked about doing a conference around this idea, and we're doing a conference next year, but then
Mhm.
Dobbs happened and Roe v. Wade was overturned. And
Right?
we can't wait to start disseminating this information because
Yeah.
this is taking the sexuality piece out of it. This is something that is impacting people's bodily
Today.
autonomy, their privacy rights,
Yes.
everything now. So
Yes.
we launched in June, literally with Privacy in Post-Roe America. What do you need to do to be safe now that this has happened?
Mm.
And every week
This episode's going in the show notes, y'all, so that y'all can go listen to it.
every week we either talk about something that's happened in the world of privacy and security and sexuality, just
Mhm.
him and I as, you know, the tech dude and the sex girl,
Mhm.
or we have people on, guests like you're talking to me, who specialize in these areas. So
Mhm.
we've had the founder of Operation Safe Escape, who helps people leaving domestic violence situations do that in a way that is technologically sound, to make sure that they're not being monitored by their abusers, to
Awesome.
make sure that when they leave they're not being tracked or traceable.
Mhm.
We talked to Stephanie Hare, who's a data privacy expert, about all the
Mhm.
ways in which the little things that we do online are aggregated and sold and used against us.
Mhm.
It's telling me there was a researcher at Stanford that was trying to use AI to read people's faces and determine their sexual orientation,
Whew.
which is hugely problematic in a country where perhaps being gay is illegal and a death penalty offense.
And especially with all the biases in AI around race, for
Yes.
fuck's sake.
Yes. So there's so many things that people don't necessarily know or think about. And
Mhm.
yet we're putting pictures online. We're sending flirty texts to our polycule. We're
Mhm.
giving so much information about ourselves in dating profiles. And so what
Yes.
we're doing every week is looking at kind of like the intersection of
Mhm.
sexuality and technology and what people need to know in order to be safe in their digital intimate lives.
Mm. You need to go listen to the show. The conference is gonna be a blast. I mean, or also terrifying. Um,
It'll be scary, and then we'll do something fun to relax you again. It'll be fine.
I'm ready, and I'll make sure that I, bring extra time for extra meditation because I can just feel it. So I am curious, like in this world of tech, in this world of online power dynamics
Mhm.
exchanges, like somebody that's new to this. I was going to ask you this question just from somebody who's new to kink, but I think that because this online space has become essentially like another appendage to
Yeah.
us, right? Like it is a part of us. It is becoming an extension of us, and uh, they're selling our shit with sometimes a lot of times without our knowledge. So, what would you say to a baby kinkster? What would you say to somebody who's coming new to this space? Where would you begin with them?
I would say that it makes logical sense to start looking for community online because
Mm,
that's what we all do these days.
yeah.
We go to FET, we go to Facebook groups, we go to Twitter, we go to Reddit. That it's an appendage. It is a logical idea, but that we need to be so much more safe in how we approach those things.
Yes.
I have had so many clients in long distance DS relationships with people that they have never met in real life.
Mm,
And online relationships in general, with or without kink, psychologically are experienced as much more intense, much
yes.
quicker
Mhm.
because we don't have the slow pace of dates. So we're not
Mhm.
spreading information that we give out over 5 or 6 dinners. We're
Right.
info dumping about our entire lives and our histories and our experiences and our sexualities and everything like in the span of 2 or 3 conversations.
It's like genogram level stuff.
Yes. And it feels very natural and organic, and it feels like how you bond and how you sort of filter potential partners online.
Mhm.
But we share so much that can be weaponized without any
Yes.
idea of who the other person is on the other side of the screen.
Mhm.
And it sounds alarmist to say that. I hear my mother's voice coming out of my mouth, thinking about my days on like the AOL
Mhm.
chat rooms back in the day. Like, you
Oh,
have no
yeah.
idea who that is. But
Mhm.
it's actually more true now than it was then because now
Yes.
we have deep fake technology. Now we have phone
Absolutely.
spoofing. Now we have so many ways that people can obfuscate who they are
Mhm.
while also gathering so much information about us. And
Mhm.
that is unfortunately often weaponized against people.
And
And
those are power dynamics you're not necessarily agreeing to in a sexy way.
yeah, I have never, no, I can't take that back. Only once in my entire career have I ever worked with a kinky dyad who negotiated information sharing. Otherwise, we just kind of assume that if I send you a
Mhm.
naked selfie, that you're keeping that for you. Or we just kind of assume that if I
Mhm.
complain about my meta to you, that that's not being screen capped and passed on. Or we just kind of assume that the pictures that they sent us are them because everybody knows to do a Google reverse image search. Great. It didn't
Mhm.
come up. It must be them. But there are
Mm.
programs that they will take tons of stock art and create a virtual fake person
Yep.
that won't come up in reverse image search because it's unique to that one user.
Absolutely.
It's
Oh.
become so much more difficult to navigate being kinky or frankly being sexual online that really what
Mhm.
I tell baby kinksters is I get that that's your first instinct, but start off in person. Find a munch, find a meetup,
Mhm.
find something where you
Yes.
can be in person with humans who are not wearing masks, digital or rubber. You can have a conversation that unfolds at a slow pace, see
Mm.
their interactions with other people and how other people are interacting with them.
Mhm.
And that's really how you need to be approaching the kink community at this point. That starting out online is overwhelming you with information that might not be accurate and putting you in a
Mhm.
vulnerable position that you can't control.
If you're starting in community in person too, you are also getting the benefit of potentially that community helping guard itself, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. And well, like what you said with Dobbs, uh, it would be a mistake for any one of us to believe that there are not other types of things like Dobbs not coming. That it's all coming. They're going to come for every part of LGBTQ plus identities. They're going to come for all kinds of things and use our data to be able to access that.
Mhm.
And so I just think this is incredibly important. I mean, I feel like this information would have been really good for teenage you, but also, what do you wish teenage you knew about kink and pleasure generally? What do you wish?
Um, so I'm maybe fortunate in that I've always had a lot of access to information,
Mm.
mostly because I am Gen X baby who was given unchaperoned access to the internet. Before our parents knew that chaperones were necessary, I
So
had
many Gen Xers and elder millennials. I'm an elder
oh yeah,
millennial. Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I had the desktop in my bedroom with the Wi-Fi or wire or sorry, the dial-up connection.
Hmm.
And I actually told the story at a hacker conference I was at last weekend. I like to joke that my best friend and I were like the perverted justice people before perverted justice existed. Because he and I, after school, would create AOL usernames that were really very overtly minors and very overtly sexual. It would be like by Sweet 16, like it would be like the username. And then we would go into the adult, like hidden adult user created chat rooms and just wait. And when immediately we started getting dozens of messages
Uh-huh.
containing porn, nearly always containing
Hmm.
solicitations,
Yes.
we would just sit there and report them to AOL and block them, report them to AOL and block them, report.
Oh, before we had an entire show dedicated to this, you were on the beat. You were
I
on
was
the
Chris
beat.
Hansen's grandmother at 15. But so on one hand, that was like how we amused ourselves as this little baby feminists and like the Riot Girl generation, right? Like that was our after school activity. The flip side of that is that means we were exposed to a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And so, what I would want teenage me to know is that just because you're seeing this in a problematic place does not mean that what you're seeing is problematic. And that it is
Mm.
possible to have healthy, happy kink expression without guilt or shame or stigma or judgment.
Mhm.
And that obviously very intentionally wasn't the space I was in. I wasn't looking for people that were out there to have consensual fun. We were looking for people that were predators.
Mhm.
But what that did to teenage me was gave me for a while the impression that this was a space that was only for predators. And
Mm.
so learning through clinical work, through being a more adult human, that there absolutely are bad apples in every single community, from the Catholic
Yes.
Church to the kink community and back again.
Absolutely.
And that we need to take that seriously, but that also we can celebrate and affirm and support people who are doing things that make them happy and that bring them closer
Mhm.
without assuming it's coming from a problematic or a deviant place. And that I think is what I would want teenage me to know.
Beautifully put. As you were describing, uh 16-year-old you, 15-year-old you, I was having those flashes of all of the pop-ups, and anytime you went into any single like chat room or anything like it, and I sound like my mother in so many times now. I'm like, you children don't even know. You don't even know what there is. Definitely Wild West places for sure on the internet still, but it is different. It's fundamentally different today than it was then. But I
It's a
think
lot safer. There are more regulations and protocols
yes.
in place. I will say that was also my introduction to sort of the information privacy and what you're putting out online side of things. Because what I didn't know
Mhm.
at that time was that whoever had the main AOL account could pull
Mhm.
up a monthly usage report by
Mm.
username. So we were creating these very explicit usernames for the span of an afternoon and then deleting them. My
Uh-huh.
parents, without any context whatsoever, were just getting monthly reports of dozens of filthy, dirty, minor 16 submissive, 16 dominant, like all sorts of like very clearly it, but they didn't know what we were doing because again,
Yeah.
room computer. So
Mhm.
I learned very early that, you know, people are watching what you do online, and just because you think something is private doesn't mean that it's secret or hidden. And that
That's right.
ties directly into everything that I talk to my clients about today when it comes to how they move through Twitter and Facebook and OkCupid and everything else.
My brain is like whirring on all of the things and all of the spaces, not only myself, but my clients go into. And I think, oh my goodness. Oh, there's so much work that needs to be done here, Stephanie. I am just so glad that you came on the show. Thank you. I hope that fixed your face a little bit. Perhaps gave you a little bit of something to think about. I really like Dr. Stefani. If you have any questions or have any other information you want about Stefani, links are below. If you want more, head over to Patreon, join the board of nerds. Also, please like, subscribe, turn on that notification bell if you don't want to miss anything. I will see you next Thursday.